Hello there, Michelle Shorts here for My Favourite Things. Today I have a card to share with you using the Adorable Ear for You set, sharing some tips and tricks with masking. So let's get started. This is the Adorable Ear for You set. I'm taking the elephant, the tree log and also a mouse from the set, and I'm going to stamp them down onto some masking paper. The idea of masking paper is so that you can create one whole image. So I can have it look like the elephant is on top or laying on the tree log, and then the mouse is standing on the elephant. You could definitely do this by stamping the images, colouring them in and die cutting them with the coordinating dynamics, but I do often like the look of masking to create like a seamless image. So I've just placed those down onto the masking paper, picked those up with the door of the Mini Misty, and now I can ink up the images with some black ink. It doesn't matter at this point which ink I use because I don't need a perfect impression. I do just need to make sure that I can see the lines so that I know where I need to cut. So I'm just stamping those down, and then I can remove that from the Mini Misty, and then I can cut these images down. So I just find it a little bit easier to take a smaller piece. So I've kind of cut this down into a smaller section, and now I'm going to go around fussy cutting this tree log. And what I like to do with masking is I like to cut on the line rather than outside of the line like I would do if I was cutting out an image, if I was just fussy cutting, for example. It's a little bit difficult to see here on camera, but I'm trying to show you that you can see some of the black line on the piece of masking paper that I'm discarding. So that means that I'm cutting enough inside of the line so that I'm not going to get like a halo around the image. Now it doesn't matter too much if I did get that, if I was just stamping images with black ink. I could fill in the lines quite easily with a black pen, but if I want to do this for like masking, if I wanted to do ink blending around the outside edges, you would get like a white line where there is no ink blending because I've cut too far outside of the lines with the masking. I hope that makes sense. You'll see kind of as I go. So I'm just making sure here to cut on the line, and sometimes I even cut kind of inside of the line, which is absolutely fine as well. I just don't want to cut outside of the line. So I'm just taking my time there to cut that out, and then I can do the same thing with the other images. Now I've got the stitched eyelet lace rectangle stacks dynamics, and I've cut that from some white cardstock and also from some scrap white paper. I have stamped the sentiment on top already just as a guide so that I can see where I want to place my images, and just for time's kind of sake I stamped it onto the white piece of cardstock as well, but I did want it stamped on the scrap piece of paper so that I can see how far up I want my images to go. So I'm going to use this kind of like a map to figure out where I want to stamp my images. So I'm removing the backing off of the masking paper here and just using some tweezers here just because I find it a little bit easier to pop things down with tweezers. And I can place the first image here where I want it to be. So I want it to be sort of centered above where the sentiment is. And then I can remove the backing off of the elephant, and then I can stick that down on top, and I'm going to overlap it so that it looks like the elephant is sitting or laying onto that tree log. And the great thing with masks is at this point, if I'm not entirely happy with the placement, I can pick it up, move it around. I can do that as many times as I want because I've not actually stamped anything. And then I can do the same thing with the mouse there, and I'm going to have it so that he looks like he's standing on the elephant's back, and then the elephant's ear is kind of sort of blocking where that foot is, if that makes sense. So you're not going to see the bottom of his foot because I don't want it to look like he's standing on his ear. You're going to kind of not see the foot there so that it looks like the elephant's ear is masking his leg. So now I've placed that back into the Mini Misty, and because the elephant is the image that I want to be stamped first, because that's the one that I don't want any kind of ink on top of, I'm going to stamp that first. So I just used the mask there to figure out where I needed to place the image, placed it on top as best as possible to line it up. I'm now bringing in my cardstock piece. I can ink up that image and stamp that down. It is going to look a little bit odd at this point, look like he's kind of hovering there, but once I add the log underneath, he's going to obviously be laying on it. So I can bring back my template here and I can remove the mask for the elephant because I've stamped that image out. I don't need that anymore, and I'm going to use that mask to mask on the other piece of cardstock. So I can just make sure that that's really well in the corner of the Mini MISTI here, because I want to make sure everything lines up perfectly when I take it from this template and stamp it onto my cardstock piece. So just lining up the tree log there and also the mouse. I can close the MISTI door so that I pick up those images, and the mask did actually come up with it. That's fine because I don't actually need it now. I've got the placement of where that's going to be stamped. I can remove that template there or that map, and then I can bring in my cardstock piece. I can then place the mask of the elephant over the top. So I want to make sure that this one is really well stuck down because I am obviously going to be stamping on top of it. So just making sure that that's really well lined up there, and then once I'm happy I can really press that down. Making sure that that piece of cardstock is right in the corner there. Bring in the magnet to hold it in place, and then I can ink up the tree log and also the mouse. So just using some black ink here that is Copic friendly. Inking them up really well, and then I can press those down. And I am going to stamp them twice just to make sure that I get a really nice dark impression of those lines. Now at this point it's not going to look very nice because it looks like the tree log is on top of the elephant, but once I take the masks off it's not going to be. But I do want to add masks over the top of the tree log here and also the mouse. If I wasn't going to add any ink blending I wouldn't need to do this. I could just make the mask for the elephant, which would be a lot quicker, but I did want to add some ink blending around the outside. So just trying to line up the mask for the mouse here. And this one did take me a little while just because it's such a tiny little image. I can then take some distress inks. So this is Twisted Citron, and it looks like I'm wasting a lot of ink. And probably I am, but I want this to be really, really pale because I want it to kind of fade out to the white of the cardstock. So I'm just adding a very light layer here. Really, I don't probably need to because I am going to go over it with Copic markers to add in some kind of grass as a ground. But I wanted this kind of base layer to be there. So just going in with a small ink blending brush, just adding that ink towards the bottom. And then I can go in with Mermaid Lagoon for the sky. And again, I'm taking most of this ink off the brush here. I just want it to be very pale. And again, I am going to go over this slightly with a little bit of Copic marker, but I'm not going to go over the whole thing. So that's why I wanted this ink blending here for the sky. So I'm just going in with a very light hand here. It does look really quite pale, but like I say, I am going to add a little bit extra on top. So just going in with circular motions, trying to get that to fade out to the white of the cardstock at the edges. And then the best bit about any masking is you get to remove the masks and see what's underneath. So starting off with the adorable little mouse at the top, and then I can go and lift up that tree log mask as well. I am keeping these masks. I'm going to pop them on the back of the stamp set so that I've got them ready to go when I next want to use them. And then I can lift off that elephant mask, and as you can see it now looks like he's laying on top of the tree log, and then you've got the mouse standing on his back as well. I just think it's such a cute image all sort of together. I can then add some colour to the image with Copic markers. So I'm starting off with my darkest shade of the brown for the tree log, and ordinarily when I'm colouring something like this I would add the darker colour towards the bottom and then lighten it up as I go towards the top. But the elephant is going to cast a shadow on the tree log, so I do want to make sure that I add some darkness underneath where the elephant is laying. I can then blend that out with the E59, which is just slightly lighter in shade. I am also adding some darker areas just randomly on this tree log to make it look more like bark. Bark does tend to have some lighter areas and some darker areas. I then blended that out with the E57 and then went in with the E55, which was my lightest shade. I am going back in with the mid-tone shade of the E57 just to kind of blend that out a little bit, make sure it's all kind of blended nicely, but I still want some kind of texture on it, like I say, because it is tree bark. Then for the elephant, I'm using some neutral greys. So I'm starting off with my darkest shade, which is N8. And I'm just going around where I think the darkest areas would be. So the bottom of his legs here. And then just around the outside edge of his ear, because I want it to make it look like it's quite a lot more forward than the rest of his body. And then I can go around the outside edge of his face and also the trunk there at the bottom. And then blending that out with the N6, which is just a slightly lighter shade. So blending that with the darker shade and then bringing that colour more into the image. I'm then adding in a little bit of pink for his cheeks and then going back in with the grey shades again. So this is N5, again just blending that with the darker shades and then pulling some of that colour more into the image and the top of his ears as well. I can then blend that out with the N4, followed by the N3. Just going around the outside edges of his ear there and filling in the rest of his front legs. And then a bit on the top of his head as well. And then I can finish off most of it with the N1. And I do just go in with the N0 just for the kind of middle portion of his head. But I do go back in with the N1 as well, just to really make sure that that's blended nicely. I'm going in with a slightly darker shade of pink for the centre of the cheeks. And then I can use that for the ears as well. I wanted them to be quite bright pink, probably not very realistic at all, but I thought this image was so cute that I wanted some brightness on it. So that's the RV55 and the RV52. And then I'm just going to go in with the N2 just to try and blend those cheeks a little bit with the rest of the elephant's skin. And then for the mouse, I'm starting off with my darkest shade of brown, which is E27. And again, just going around where I think the darkest areas will be, sort of at the bottom of his feet there, the bottom of his arms, and then around the outside edges of his face. Then I can blend that out with the E25. Followed by the E23. And I wanted the top of his head to be a little bit darker than the bottom. Kind of like where his cheeks are, I wanted it to be a bit lighter, so I'm using the E21 for that. And then I'm using the same pink shades for his ears. And then I'm just going to go in with a slightly darker shade with the pink for the heart as well. So everything does match really nicely together. And then I can use the pink for his nose there as well. And then to add a little bit of extra to the background, I'm going in with some green Copic markers. So this is YG17 to start with. And I'm just adding in some blades of grass around the outside edges of that tree log there. And then also just adding in a little bit towards the bottom of the tree log as well, just to make it look like it's inside of an image rather than kind of just floating there. So I went in with the YG23 followed by the YG01, and then I'm just going back in there with the G29 just to darken that even more on those grass blades. And then for the sky I'm using B00. and just adding some dots here. And I realized at this point that it was a little bit lighter than I wanted it to be. It kind of blended too much with the ink blending in the background, but I did just want to go through and add the dots everywhere just in case you can see them. And then I'm going in here with the B02, which is just slightly darker, and you can see that a little bit better. That just really adds a little bit of extra detail onto that background. So on the back of this image here, you can see the Copic marker because it has bled through the cardstock, which is quite often what happens unless you're using very, very thick cardstock. So I have cut another of the panels here, and I'm going to adhere that onto the back. Not only is this going to cover up that bleed through of the Copic marker, but it also is just going to look a little bit neater and nicer on the back of this panel, because you are going to see it, because I want to create a different kind of card base here. I didn't want to just add this onto an A2 sized white card base, because I wanted you to be able to see through the holes in the rectangle, because I thought it was quite nice. So what I've done is I've made a kind of like a little card base that just fits inside of where that stitching detail is. So this is 3.5 inches by 4 3/4 inches. So I can add some adhesive onto the back of that, and then I can pop that onto the back of this piece here. So it is still a card base, but the actual card base itself is quite little. So what's really helpful about having the 2 layers on the back of the panel, although this card here would cover up that Copic marker anyway, it does just give it a little bit of extra stability, because this card base obviously is smaller than the size of the card. When it stands up, I want to make sure that it's not going to fall over. So you can see here that it stands up really nicely. And I do think having those 2 layers on the front does make a difference for that. I'm then taking a 0.5 white gel pen, adding a couple of dots to the elephant's cheeks. I've then got a clear glaze pen that I'm adding onto the nose there of the mouse, just to give it a little bit of shine, and then some black glaze pen on the elephant's eyes, and that's just going to help it pop. It's quite a lot darker in shade, and it also adds a little bit of kind of shine as well. And then just for some added extra detail, I'm using a 0.8 white gel pen, adding a few dots into the background. It's quite difficult to see here on screen, but in real life you can see them fairly easily. I mean, they're not like bright white, but it is quite nice just to add that kind of extra little detail, because I didn't want to add any embellishments on this card. And you can see them a little bit easier here when I bring that closer to the camera. So that is the card finished for today, completely 1 layer card. And like I say, it's just something a little bit different with the masking, but you could definitely do the same design with die cutting as well, and that also would work quite nicely. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.